Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk, and we are discussing national political news of the day. We're going to dedicate the first two segments to the state of freedom of choice in America right now. The politics of abortion rights have reached a feverish pitch in the United States. It all started this week with a kind of a bizarre video released by Donald Trump in which he proclaimed that both sides wanted Roe v. Wade overturned. He's kind of a misunderstanding of some dynamics that we'll explain in a few minutes. But it was really bad timing for this video because a day later, also in the video, he said it's what everybody wanted. It returned the decision making to the states, took it away from the federal government, and returned it to the states. And then a day later, the state of Arizona Supreme Court basically ruled that the in 1864, a century and a half old, very draconian anti-abortion law is enforceable. This was passed about half a century before Arizona even became a state. It basically outlawed almost all abortions, no exception for rape or incest, and actually, even technically speaking, not even for a miscarriage, unless it can be definitively shown to be life-threatening to the mother. So it is so bad that even Republicans are running from it. Even Scary Carrie Lake is opposed to it now, although she previously praised it. And Republicans across the country, all of a sudden Donald Trump says, yeah, it went too far, just a couple of days after he said, hey, leave it to the states. Well, here it is, leaving it to the states. And a number of Republicans are running from it, saying it goes too far. But other Republicans are praising it, saying this is what we wanted. Senator Joni Ernst from Iowa saying, no, this is exactly what we've been fighting for. And when the Democrats in the state legislature of Arizona tried to make a move to repeal it, Republicans blocked it. So this is where we're at. This basically criminalizes anybody who would offer abortion. The court seemed to imply that it only applies to doctors, but if you read the actual law, it says anybody who provides any type of medication or anything. So it could apply to anybody providing abortion pills, and possibly even the mail deliverers, if they're the ones delivering it. I mean, it is, again, we are at a bizarre point in our history, political history of this, all enabled because the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. And I'll be happy to come back and explain what Trump thinks he understood about both sides wanting Roe v. Wade to be overturned. That was not the case. There were criticisms of the legal basis for Roe v. Wade, criticisms, by the way, that I disagree with, but we can get into that. But the Republicans are in a panic. They're on the run on this, and the Democrats are getting ready to really hammer the Republicans hard on this issue. All of a sudden, Donald Trump was forced to say that he would not sign a bill for a national ban on abortion. That's threatening to turn some evangelicals against him. I mean, we can go into more details, but abortion has been the bane of a lot of their attempts to win elections over the past couple of years, ever since Dodd came down. Before that, abortion was never really all that effective an issue for Democrats in elections, but it seems to be what's keeping Democrats alive over the past couple of years. I'm going to hand this over to you, Dave. I mean, there's plenty to talk about here.
Yeah, thank you for that setup, as always. I think the way you framed this for me, how we should start, is Trump's video itself. sort of the context for the video, maybe a little bit of the content, and then somewhat, how it played out. You already mentioned that the timing couldn't have been worse for him.
No, could not have
And,
been worse.
right. So I'm gonna go one. I think I've been using this term a little too much lately, but 30,000 foot view. Um, Basically, we're talking about what you've said for months now, if not going on a year or more, maybe 2 years, that this is a losing issue for Republicans. It's like the dog that caught the car. Um, Not necessarily because of their own base not getting what they wanted. In terms of like your constituents and the people who are your base, they are delivering. So Trump did deliver during his presidency. Um, in fact, by nominating Neil Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, and Brett Kavanaugh, the goal, to a certain extent, of course, there's a broader jurisprudence. This isn't the only issue, but the states' rights argument that a lot of the conservatives have been pushing for a long time, this is a manifestation of that. So in this speech, Trump did claim publicly like that, he has done more than for the pro-life movement than any other president in history. So to a certain extent, he whether he's right or wrong, he's self-aware. He's very self-aware that he was the causal agent of this. Um, and Dobbs is the actual mechanism by which the ripple, the shockwave, went through the country. And in the midterm elections in 2022, and then some of the other state, issues where they were, I'm trying to think of the name, the referendums, basically to get abortion enshrined in constitutions. There's no denying that Trump's role will have consequences. So I think this speech, in that context, he even mentioned actually Planned Parenthood. They've done a lot for reproductive health. While but he also says that they should be defunded. Like these are things that Trump has said that he praises the organization, but just doesn't think that abortion should be, he's playing to the base about abortion. So then the question is like, what's Trump's political calculation? We know the reality. The calculation is that by taking credit for Dobbs, but telling the party, pushing back against the party that it's harmful. It's there is evidence through election results, whether it was Missouri or Kentucky, even Ohio, Wisconsin. There have been election outcomes that have been people are in response, not even just Democrats coming out in droves, but independents, Republicans, women across the spectrum, people. We can get into the nitty gritty, but people, there is a big pushback, and so I think
And,
Trump's trying to get ahead of it.
and in fact, I'll let you continue. But in fact, in every special election since Dobbs, the Democrats have outperformed the polls by at least 3 points in every special election. Not necessarily the midterms. It's been a mixed bag, but most of the midterms elections they outperformed polls. A few exceptions in New York and a few other places, but every single special election they have outperformed polls, which is incredible. But
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I appreciate it because it puts it underlines and fine points sort of where I was going with this. The last thing I was going to say basically about this before we could get into more of the nitty gritty is that it just as a general sort of putting your finger to the wind. A lot of folks have said that the pro-life movement really was saying states' rights all along, but in fact they had a larger agenda. And I don't mean to group everybody together. Everyone, different groups, different people, they've got obviously different opinions on things, but generally speaking, what has been revealed in the recent past is that it's for example, Lindsey Graham pushing a national 15-week ban. That's not states' rights. And so Trump, to a certain extent, is telling his party, look, like, be happy with what we have accomplished already. We have effectively, I think it's 21 states where as soon as Dobbs came down, they said, hey, we're going to kick in our existing bans. And so, each state has a different flavor, but this most recent thing in Arizona is just another example of how on a state by state basis, the Republicans are getting, conservatives, pro-life movement are getting what they want, but the consequences are, palatable. The question is that palatable? And Trump is saying no. Like let's hold back a little bit on pushing for more at this point?
So, and the problem that Trump and the Republicans have here is that they aren't fully grasping the certain, I don't even want to call it extreme end, because they're not necessarily political extremists. There are people who hold a genuine religious view that human life, in terms of the soul, or whatever you want to call it, begins at conception. That once conception happens, that they are a human life, that if you terminate it, it's murder at that point. And you can debate the merits of that. You can debate the religious merits of that. You can debate the scientific merits of that, because you get into definitions of what is human life. From a secular point of view, we tend to define it as, when does a life become self-aware, and defining it as human being, I think therefore I am Descartes, blah blah blah. But it's but to a religious person, they tend to believe that it begins at conception, and so any abortion at that point and is murder. So to say you 6 weeks or 15 weeks or any time is basically to allow some murder. So it's sort of like, well, that saying that it would have been okay to kill. I've heard people say this. That's like saying that it would have been okay if the Nazis only killed 1 million Jews instead of 6 million. I mean, that's insane to some people. So it's and they see it that way. They see it as a Holocaust. They see it in these terms, and so they see Trump as rationing. They want Trump to oppose abortion, and they might support him, might even vote for him as a vehicle to move in that direction. But they're not happy with this right now, and the more he gets pushed into moderating his positions and saying no, he wouldn't vote for a national ban, the more disappointed they're going to be, and so the Democrats are going to push for more and more and more. I mean, it's a real difficult position for them to be in, and so in the meantime, he's going to be pushed into how he's going to vote on the abortion referendum measure in Florida. It's the Democrats are pushing for these resolutions to be on the ballot in all kinds of states, swing states. And if they have a chance in Florida, it's because of that, right? They've got one in Montana. They've got one in Arizona, actually. Now it's all of a sudden that's becoming an existential issue, not just a strategic one at this point. And so they've got this problem. I want to go back really quickly to Trump saying people on both sides wanted Roe v. Wade overturned. That's not the case. People on both sides were critical of the basis of the plurality ruling on Roe v. Wade, which was based on Griswold of trying to create what some people, legal scholars, saw as a right out of thin air. You can't create a right out of thin air, but I strongly disagree with that. There are different philosophies of rights. There's a philosophy that government grants rights, and so you've got to have a basis for them. There's another philosophy of natural law in which rights are there, whether by some sort of God or by providence, or just a sense of when you're a human, there are certain rights you have automatically, and government doesn't grant those rights. The government simply recognizes those rights. And the Ninth Amendment was put in the Constitution by Madison because he said there's no way we can think up all the rights that qualify. And it reads, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. And conservatives for the longest time have wanted to say that basically means the people means the states. But no, you've already got that covered in the 10th Amendment. And liberals just want to say it's just a general philosophical statement, but it's not. It actually should be ruled to have a practical consideration. And so when when this was ruled in Griswold and Roe v. Wade, some of the justices said that, there are other rights, and you can find a right of privacy in the penumbra of all of the rights. You can find privacy in the Third Amendment, which says houses can't be seized. You can find it in the Fifth Amendment and in the Fourth Amendment. In terms of not being allowed to have your houses searched or seized, it's inherent in the rights and in common sense. And it's never been a question when we've had courts rule that we have a right to travel from state to state, when we have a right to contract, and right to have a family. Nobody ever questioned it until it got to a controversial topic like birth control in Griswold and abortion. I feel it's on completely solid ground and should not have been overturned. But I'm in the minority, even among a lot of liberal jurist experts who say, no, you've got to have it all be in the law with some type of precedent. You can't be having these laws out there, or these rights just out there. It's got to be created anyway.
Yeah, so I'll comment on that because I think that's important. The philosophy behind this. You mentioned Griswold versus Connecticut, and I think it's worth mentioning a term that people often forget. But in that case, the penumbra of rights, which was almost like, I picture always like a rainbow, how it just emanates out, or we just had this big eclipse. You see the corona, you see the sun outside the moon during an eclipse, like the glowing around the outside. The penumbra of rights that emanate out of the Constitution. So in that opinion, they talked about the right of privacy. So there is no right of privacy that's written out and spelled out and clearly, in statute. But Griswold says, like, people have a right to privacy, and that whole penumbra concept, it goes back. I mean, you're the lawyer, you could tell us more, but it goes back. I remember. Justice Marshall wrote about it when he said, like, the Constitution gives the federal government unstated rights over the states. The supremacy, the idea that the Constitution itself and the federal government is supreme over the states' governments in the areas that are spelled out, that they don't have to be written down. Because they will be determined over time as we evolve as a society. And so this is one of those things where I think people that are pro-life pushed back and said, you don't have a right to, like what is it, Casey versus Planned Parenthood? You have a right to birth control. The government shouldn't be in your bed deciding when you're going to have a baby and not have a baby. These ideas that they exist, like you said, natural law. So much of the founding principles were about, and that was the justification for pushing back against the aristocrats. They owned it. The king owned everything, but natural law said, no, some things are more important than the laws that are written, and that's the rights of men and humanity. So this is one of those things where the right to life movement decided that they wanted to push back on something. They felt like, no, this should be handled by legislatures. And I think now we're seeing what happens when state legislatures are in a position. We're going to talk about this in the next segment, but the idea that we can go back to the 1864 policies of a bunch of people like barely surviving on the outskirts of civilization, because of Dobbs, it just doesn't pass the smell test. It just seems something is patently wrong.
No, absolutely. It's this happened in the 19th century, just as the abortion sort of laws were starting to be passed. For centuries we didn't have anti-abortion policy or laws, really, and abortions have existed since the beginning of time, at least attempts at it, but it was really only with the advent of fundamentalist politics that it really started to take off. I mean, you could have had them, but it was when we don't have time to go into all that, but it's just this, you cannot say this isn't an effort to control women. I do believe that there are Christians out there and other religious traditions that really do believe in their hearts that these are human souls being destroyed. I get that. I mean, yeah, you got to question it though. The fact, if you believe it starts at conception, and there are some biological estimates that of the conceptions, only 1 in 7 by some estimates are even viable. They die without us even, quote unquote, without us even knowing about it. What does that say about God then, right? I mean, it's a big question if 6 out of 7 or even 4 out of 7 of them just automatically fall apart within days, and people don't even know they had a conception. Women don't even know they had a conception. So, but people do earnestly believe that. But if you're willing to talk about 6 weeks or 15 weeks or whatever, then it's really not about that, is it? It's about controlling women. It's about interfering with the women's relationship with their doctors, with and trying to set arbitrary rules about when, who, what, and where. And I've also often told people when they say, well, if you believed a human life was being lost, would you still be pro-choice? And I would still kind of argue. I would still argue yes, actually, because it's the domain of the woman's body is outside of the realm of the state. There's moral, and then there's what is legal. I believe if someone was dying and needed a blood transfusion, and I was the only one within range that had the right type of blood for that person, as far as I'm concerned, if I deny that person the blood, I'm committing murder ethically. But I don't believe that the state or the group or whatever has the right to strap me down and extract it against my will, because that is my province. So there's what is moral, and there's what I in terms of my agency, what I have the right to do. It's horrible, but the group or the nation or whatever has to let me have that freedom in order to for my rights to exist, and that has to be worth it. And it's unfortunate for that person, but that's the way it is. Now that's I wouldn't do that, and most people wouldn't do that, but that is the ethos there. So no, I would not support what is essentially slavery for 9 months. For any amount of time. If you want to cite another amendment that should prevent this, it's the 13th Amendment against slavery, because that's what it is. It's basically a forced incubator for 9 months or however much time it's involved. And so when we're talking about this, the federal government does have primacy over states when it comes to fundamental rights via the 14th Amendment. It didn't exist until after the Civil War, but the Civil War established that the federal courts have the right to enforce fundamental rights because they had been deprived up until that point, and we needed a centralized guarantee of those rights.
Eric, I think, and thank you for that, because I think it was thoughtful and insightful. You touched on freedom, right? And so I think that part of the reason we see, and I realize we're doing two topics here. We're going to pivot away from Trump towards Arizona, towards the case, the recent case. But I think that the sort of a bridge across the two topics is what we're talking about is women's reproductive health. And the reason that so many, not just women, so many people, Democrats, independents, Republicans, non-aligned people have turned out. The reason that this has been such a consequential topic, it become like abortion didn't used to be the kind of thing that inspired people to say, I have to make sure that I vote. Like the reason that it is now such, the protection of women's health is so front and center is now we're starting to see the complications that come from state intervention in the relationship between doctors and patients, between women and their families, between families and doctors. That there's a role for policy, but you pointed out morality, and what in Kentucky, Governor Andy Beshear during his reelection, the support was galvanized around him, in part because of the commercials that were run that were showing that there were women who were denied care during pregnancy. A woman, at least this one commercial that I saw. I mean, I don't know how many commercials they had like this, but commercials like this are popping up all over. Stories, news events. The reality is people are experiencing that care denied during pregnancy could lead to infertility. And so if the idea is that we want to encourage families and we want to encourage health, and for that matter, if we want women to have more than one baby, not just the one that they happen to have right now, but if they choose to have a large family, that they keep the family growing, that we're realizing that this is really regressive. It's
Yeah.
to step in like this. It's not really just abortion. It's the timing of the when you have children. It's reproductive health science best practices. When you're telling doctors, like in Texas, we're seeing cases where the doctors are saying, nope, we can't do it. What's the legal definition of the protecting the life of the mother? We're going to err on the side of not being sued by a law that might be written in a way that could take away our right to practice medicine or potentially shut down the hospital. It like so they say that if you don't know where you're going, the first step's probably in the wrong direction. I think that's kind of where we're headed, is that there's so many steps in the wrong direction. And now we have 21 states that are in a situation where there are bans in place. Like right now, I happen to be physically located in Florida. It's on the news like every day down here that DeSantis has, his Republican legislature has put in a 6-week ban, but
Mm-hmm.
that the Supreme Court here just upheld it, state Supreme Court. But they said that the people have a right to the referendum in November to decide if they want to enshrine reproductive rights in the Constitution or not. So the Republicans were allowed to pass a law that says, hey, we're going to be one of the most extreme laws in the country, but the people do get their say. So states across the country, 21 states across the country, are in a situation where people, Dobbs unleashed the most extreme interpretations of people's intervention in reproductive health.
Yeah, I agree. And Biden has just released an ad. I don't know if you've seen it, but a couple where the wife lost her fertility because she was unable to get the abortion in time that was going to be a miscarriage anyway, and now she is unable to have children. The ultimate area there, and it's a very hard-hitting article. I would put it on par with the old girl with the flower H bomb, in the LBJ Goldwater one. It's very hard-hitting, and they're going to be plastering it all over the place. It was actually produced before Trump's video. I have to say that this video is about the biggest mistake Trump has ever made. Now we'll see if it actually hurts him as badly as we think, but I just have to. He must not have known that this case was going to be decided by the Supreme Court in Arizona, because, like as we've said, I think that he shouldn't have talked about it. His advisors should have maybe had him say something a bit different. And as you say, he was trying to push back against the Republicans for saying this was a bad thing, but they don't know how to react to it, because if they push to moderate too much, they are jeopardizing the coalition, because there are people who are really strong on this issue, where they've been willing to put up with a lot from Trump in terms of his personal life and his affairs, because you look at biblical figures like David and Solomon, and they had multiple wives, they cheated, they even had their people that they had affairs with, their husbands killed, and the rest, and they just say, people in the Bible, God moved through them. But on this kind of a thing, they might not be as forgiving, because this is a fundamental existential issue of politics, one of those third rail issues. And he's already getting pushback from people. He had a little bit of a spat with Senator Graham, in which Graham once again got humiliated for speaking his mind, as he always does. And he privately hates Trump, but he can't do anything about it. Because Graham is pushing for a national 15-day ban. He wants it, or says he wants it. Who knows what he really wants? But that's what he's pushing. So, like I said, and yeah, these state legislatures, you've got these draconian laws in Alabama that are even with the new exceptions being made, are still threatening in vitro fertilization treatment. And in other states, Texas and Alabama seem to be the worst, but it's popping up in other states as well. It's causing them problems, and every time something like this hits the headlines, it's just a reminder of what was done. And here you've got the Trump. The Democrats are going to replay it over and over and over again until November. I take credit for Roe versus Wade, or for overturning Roe versus Wade. It's going to be played probably 3 times in one commercial, with some type of echo and him going, and just every bizarre thing. It's kind of interesting. The term penumbra comes up, with the eclipse, but he had a really bizarre kind of ad too of his own head blocking the sun, as a moon. I'm not even sure what that's supposed to mean, but anyway, he's just I think this was a political miscalculation. He usually has really good instincts. I'm not one of those people who thinks he's stupid. I think he's brilliant, but this was clearly a miscalculation.
So I agree with most of what you've said today, but in terms of it being a miscalculation, I think he sees the data, and I think he's got a superpower to anticipate the challenges that he faces. He's got a lot of problems, of course, in his election campaign. But even Fox News here ran a big chart, shifting views on abortion in America, and so the group of people that think it should always be legal, or legal most of the time, has gone 2 years ago from about 1 out of 34% to now it's like 60%. That's a huge swing. The set of people that are Trump's base, that are the never evers, it went from around 11% to around 7%. So there's a big shift in people that think that something is wrong and that something needs to change. And that includes a lot of who Trump would call and identify as his base. And if the pattern that's happened over the last 2 years or 3 years, since we've seen these midterm elections, and like you said, some of the state referenda and other things of that nature. So this segment, we were supposed to talk a little bit more about Arizona than we did, but in Arizona, the Attorney General said she's not going to enforce it, and they do have something on the ballot for November, and it is going to turn out people. And Carrie Lake, I'll talk about this later, but Carrie Lake knows it, and she actually flipped on this quickly and went tracked with Trump. And she switched her own opinion that she was for this, and thinking that was going to be, talking to the base. But now she realizes that it could be the end of her chances to become this next senator.
Hey everyone, this is Marjorie Green. I'm excited to talk to you guys today. I want to go through the entire story of everything that's been going on.
Have you guys been following 4chan, Q?
It's a story that if you were actually to write this in a book, honestly, I probably would quit reading the book because it's so unbelievable.
It's an anonymous person. Q is a patriot. We know that for sure.
It's not just Democrat and Republican, left and right. You can dive down in that Civil War into deeper levels, where we have basically the deep state is fighting back against President Trump, the loyal people in his administration, and the American people. Okay?
I mean, is it going to be true that the child pedophilia and the elites in the Washington, D.C., is that what we're really going to see come out? Is it true? Is the type of corruption we're going to see come out, is it going to be satanic worship?
So Mike Johnson, Speaker Mike Johnson, came in following the fall of Kevin McCarthy as the Speaker of the House. He came from the far right, but he's actually done pretty well to move towards the center, at least in terms of his politics. And he has held the coalition together pretty well, made compromises with the Democrats, and it seemed to at least bring back at least the impression of functionality of the House. For some time, the government hasn't shut down, and Senate Republicans, to the relief of Senate Republicans, he hasn't basically destroyed their chances of claiming the Senate. And he has, lessened the likelihood that they will lose the House. But they have this really goofy rule in place that we have discussed on the show, where one member of the House can call for a vote on an ouster of the Speaker, and Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is part of the Crazy Caucus, has done this because she is upset that Johnson has made too many compromises with the Democrats, that he's wanting to get aid to Ukraine instead of the border, and not willing to shut down the government, and so on, and is not willing to take all the positions that play well in in her very conservative district in Georgia, that would sink a lot of Republicans in the more competitive district. So she is calling for his ouster, and it has led to a huge backlash among a lot of Republicans. She's under a lot of pressure. She was pressured to meet with Johnson today. Not a whole lot came out of it. Certainly no deal. And so the question is, what is going to happen here? And is she going to force this vote? She is not promising not to. And it is, people have come out to defend her. People have come out to attack her. My favorite quote is from former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who says, "She's a very serious legislator." Now, think about that. I mean, what does that say? I mean, is that if you're praising somebody, are you going to say she's a serious legislator? I mean, you want to, you can come up with more than that. That's a pretty low bar, I mean, but that's what they want, is to do this. And then he went on to compare her to Matt Gaetz and say, oh, well, she's better than Matt Gaetz. I mean, okay, maybe, I don't know. So it's just, they've got this civil war going. They're in an election season. They're about, people there are facing primary races still. Some of them, most of them have pretty much settled it, and they're about to go into election season. They've got Democrats waiting to hammer them with whatever is going to happen or not happen. Ukraine is on the edge. They're having a hard time. They're running out of ammunition, and she doesn't care. It's not a NATO ally, she said. She doesn't care if they fall, and you've got a bunch of people. I don't know if she's one of them, but a bunch of people in the Crazy Caucus have almost defended Putin in several cases, and fed right into some of the conspiracy theories that Putin owns some of the Republican caucus. So, where does this go, Dave?
Firstly, I think it's somewhat laughable to think that some of these folks are actually serious legislators. It's more of a in many cases, it's an ego-driven, team building exercise of social media attention, and kind of basically like a vicious cycle of proposing things that they think are popular so that they can get a lot of likes, and it's a downward spiral in many ways. So I just think that's worth saying, because you frame this as Marjorie Taylor Greene versus Speaker Mike Johnson. Like, what's happening? She has proposed a motion to vacate because it only takes one Congress member, and like you'd said, there's a coalition of somewhere between half a dozen and a dozen people that want to really kind of muck up the process in the name of principle. I would say that there are principles, but there's also the situation that it's opportunism, I guess, is really what I'm getting at here. So this Marjorie Taylor Greene published a 5-page letter that said, these are the complaints about the speaker. These are the things he's not doing. So one of them was he didn't guarantee that there were conservative elements in the budget negotiations where they were willing to shut down the government in the name of, sort of these small token little victories, basically, that were symbolic. Instead of making it part of the larger legislative process that's germane to any particular issue that they had, they wanted to kind of hold the whole country hostage, all the entire government, in the name of securing small victories. So that's one of the elements. I think Ukraine is another huge one, of course. But again, that's, if that was going to be a matter of principle, the principles that seem to be that serious legislators are talking about is accountability for the money, and is there guarantees that the corruption and the graft and the sort of CBS had to pull a story where they investigated this. So there are bigger issues involved. The accountability is a serious issue, but denying the money indefinitely is more of a political stunt. And so also there were other procedural things that maybe are principled, like saying we should be able to read bills before we vote on them. That's something that has been everybody complains about that. So yeah, so I get it. That's not just a stunt; it's a complaint, but it's that's how Republicans have been running the House, as long as they've had the majority. Another big one: Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act reauthorization. There are legitimate complaints that people on both the right and the left have about how the intelligence community collects data. But the idea that you're going to hold up the reauthorization of one of the most important bills, or that you would vacate the speakership over his trying to navigate a bipartisan solution to any one of these problems. I guess my takeaway here is that Speaker Johnson's in a very tough position. He's a strong conservative. If you look at how he behaved as a legislator, he's one of the most extreme conservatives in the whole House. But he's, as a leader, he has to compromise, and so that's where the rub is. It's about deliberation and governance versus what the political sport.
Absolutely. But he also, unlike her, has to worry. His job is to worry about November. She doesn't seem to care all that much. I mean, at least she doesn't, seem to worry about it. You look at a lot of the analysis, and the Democrats it's pretty 50-50. But people digging deep are saying that probably the Democrats are more likely than not to retake the House. She does this, it just looks like they don't have it together. Even if he survives, it just looks like, what are they doing? I mean, McCarthy calling her a serious legislature. Is there any legislation with her name on it that we know about? I mean, I don't know. Maybe there is, but I certainly haven't heard anything that's passed, that she's famous for, that she can point out. So all we've got are people in there for whom governing is not the priority. I mean, right. That it is, they're in there to be outsiders, they're ranting at the system. I mean, that's that is, Trump is perceived as an outsider. I mean, he was president for 4 years, and he's an outsider, right? These are people who have been in there since, some of them since forever, and they want to be perceived as outsiders, railing against some sort of system, no matter how much money they bring in. I mean, Trump brags that he just broke Biden's record in a fundraiser with a lot of people writing checks, and the rest. So, I mean, what about draining the swamp, right? I mean, it's just, so what are they, anyway, what is the end game here? And I think part of the problem that some of the Republicans have is, what does she really have in mind? What does she want? And so it's really not about green, though. It's about the dysfunction. And there is a certain point where even some of the more conservative Americans who are not caught up in the MAGA euphoria are going to say, yeah, okay, what are you doing there? What is happening? I mean, okay, we can blame inflation on Biden, but what are you doing to make it better?
Yeah, and so I'm going to avoid the inflation conversation for now, only because it's to divert. Like, I don't think you can blame a single person for a global phenomena, of course,
Right.
but it seems to be a political, again, another political stunt. I think Ukraine is a really good example because in the situation with Ukraine, we have a legacy of the post-Soviet era. There's enough blame to go around about how it was managed. Like people have very strong opinions about it, but we are where we are. And NATO are our allies, and our allies we're in alignment with the integrity of Ukraine and the international rules-based order. That's the prevailing wisdom in Washington D.C. For many people on both sides of the aisle, Ukraine resolving how we manage the relationship with Ukraine is a top priority. And I've heard it said that there's this push-pull of the factions. Even the founding fathers wrote about it in the Federalist Papers. The competing factions will find a balance, will find an equilibrium. The Republicans have a rule, the Hastert rule, that says that if a majority of the party doesn't agree to something, that they will not bring it to the floor for a vote. And now, because they have a margin of one, that it's just a couple people can prevent things from going to the floor, and so that's giving a degree of confidence in the minority position within Congress, within the government writ large, that they can undermine compromise, they can undermine deliberation and progress. So there's this new equilibrium basically that I would argue Speaker Johnson's doing a great job of trying to manage. He's saying, I will come up with a workaround to this. I will float the idea of using the Repo Act that we take. I'm talking about Ukraine, for example, because I think it's a good example. That there's seized Russian assets and that we could use them as part of the funding mechanism for an ally, so that we're not just giving $50 billion a year indefinitely in credits for et cetera, et cetera. But the other piece of the thing that he floated, and again, I'm not a huge fan of his, but that we make some of this aid as loans. So, for example, back during the corona, corona, back during the COVID crisis, COVID virus situation, health emergency, to keep the economy going, loans were given. Some loans were forgiven if you checked certain boxes. So he's basically expressed a willingness to be creative. But Marjorie Taylor Greene is using this, motion to vacate as like a sword of Damocles, that if he just says the wrong thing at the wrong time, that he's going to cut off his speakership. So again, you mentioned dysfunction. I think that's where we stand, and it appears that the Democrats will be willing to give him enough support, for example, to keep the government open, enough support to keep things moving forward. And I think that could be his escape hatch to navigate the situation, at least through the election.
Yeah, but they're going to want something for it. I mean, that's why McCarthy did. They were like, he said, "Hey, you need to save me," and it's like, yeah, what are you gonna give us? That's how politics works. And he didn't want to offer anything. And it's like, okay, well, then you're on your own. I mean, so they're gonna have to offer something. You got to get something to Ukraine now. Yeah, the loan thing. I mean, that's kind of reminiscent of how Roosevelt was able to help certain the Lend-Lease policy.
Exactly.
Thing and which a lot of the loans were never paid, so it's just
exactly.
And so that's how it works. So again, I mean, this is existential. At a certain point, if Ukraine suffers more losses, that's going to have an effect, because people, they've kind of got fatigue over reports on Ukraine. But if too much more happens on that, and again, the Democrats just point at the Republicans and say, yeah, we're doing pretty well there, and then Republicans cut them off. Now, granted, there's a lot going on. Europe is stepping up on their assistance, and there's actually movements to quote unquote, immunize the aid stuff from Trump. I mean, they're actually setting up a whole foundation in Europe that'll be managed straight from NATO and the rest. And so Ukraine will probably get the aid it needs, but every loss they're blaming on the Republicans. And anytime they get hit, they're really making a point of this. I mean, this is probably unfair, because they're going to be, they're fighting a war against a superior force that they're outnumbered and outgunned. They're going to face losses, but that's what happens when you play these kind of games. I'll let you close it out.
The question that, for us, for our purposes, is will the Republican House be able to manage to exhibit leadership? And I think leadership requires people to step forward, be straight shooters, make your case, but at the end of the day, compromise, figure it out, provide for the people. And so we're seeing this in fits and starts, but because it's such a controversial election year, we're not really seeing leadership right now, and we're all for the worse because of it.
Eeny, meeny, chili beany, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. What do you have for us, Dave?
Well, I have a theme that I've used before, where I make a prediction about something we discussed during the show. I'm gonna follow that today. In Arizona, the Senate race is such a critical component of the balance of power in the Senate, based on the situation we described today with the abortion ruling and how that's going to inspire and motivate people to turn out in droves. Ruben Gallego was already ahead of Kari Lake. Since Kirsten Sinema dropped out, his lead is now up to an average of 5 points in recent polls, with some polls indicating 8 and beyond. I think that this is the marginal difference necessary for him to coast to a wide victory.
I think the ruling probably just made it possible. I am going to make a prediction that Tim Scott will be Donald Trump's vice presidential candidate. He has been very active in pulling together an organization to court black Republicans, to draw in black voters, as we've discussed over the past actually 8 years. There have been a trickle of black voters moving towards Donald Trump, or towards the Republican Party, away from the Democratic Party. I'm not convinced that it's actual people who have voted Democratic in the past that are moving. I think he's pulled people out of a large pool of people who haven't voted much in the past, although they always do get people to say, oh, I've been a Democrat all my life, to go onto YouTube to say that. But he is being fairly effective with that, and the polls do indicate some movement. But I've been hearing this all my life. Oh, black voters are moving to the Republican Party. I heard it during the Reagan administration. I heard it during George Bush. I've heard about every group. So I think there is something to the story. But in light of that, I do believe that Senator Tim Scott is going to be Donald Trump's vice presidential pick. We'll see if I'm right, but until then, stay informed and stay engaged.